Hey everybody, Josh Collacchi here with RotoCurve and the next edition of the NFL Learning Curve here, or only at RotoCurve.com. Today we will discuss FanDuel wide receivers, which are the best wide receivers you can use on FanDuel, which receivers you can use in GPP and cash games, and how do we look at these guys? Now, FanDuel for wide receivers is probably the most important part of your lineup, simply because there are three of them. Now, of course, there are 30 teams in the NFL, and most teams start two or even three receivers, so there's a lot to choose from. But that doesn't mean that the position is a plenty. It's still scarce because there aren't that many receivers that score on a consistent basis. Now, we looked at last year, and I was just scraping some information and I've been looking around, and there were only 30 wide receivers last year that averaged double-digit FanDuel points for 2014 season. So finding the safer ones is the way you want to go for your cash games, for 50-50s and head-to-heads. Now, how do we find these guys? First, the guy that we want to talk about the most, and probably the one that everybody will be talking about, should be for a long time, and that's Antonio Brown. Now, although he's very expensive, he's definitely the one receiver that's worth paying for in cash games pretty much every single week. He has a record streak that I'm sure you've heard of, and if you haven't, it's really rather insane. It's 33 straight games of 5 catches for 50 or more yards. Now, think about that for a second. That's an absolute floor of 7.5 FanDuel points. That's incredible. That doesn't take into account any more catches, any more yards, or even touchdowns that he scored, which he scored a lot last year as well. So we're talking about a guy that's been incredibly consistent. And the one thing we just said is, remember how I just mentioned about all those receivers, just 33 average double-digit points? Guys that have averaged 7.5 or more last year, only 58 receivers did that. So for a guy's floor, like Antonio Brown, we're talking about a floor that matches better than about 95% of the players in the NFL. So that's really an impressive stat. Now, if you're looking at the rest of the guys like that, you're going to be looking at guys that catch a lot of passes in a high-volume offense. Guys like Brandon Cooks, Jarvis Landry, even guys like Julian Edelman for the Patriots. So all these guys that are very high-volume catchers, and in cash games on FanDuel, you're going to want to use guys like that, simply because they're going to have a floor because of their catches and yards. They see the ball all the way down the field, not just in the red zone or not just on the other side of the field. So it gives them the ability to accrue points pretty much throughout the entire game. Now, a lot of these teams will be running the ball in the middle of the field, so you're only going to see passing downs maybe once or twice. But on third and short, these guys will catch the ball there as well. So it gives them the maximum opportunity to get fantasy points. And in cash game for FanDuel, for wide receivers, we're looking at those who aren't going to have a low number as opposed to the guys that could possibly get a really high number. Now, for those guys that possibly can get a really high number, that's what we're looking at for GPP receivers. These are guys like Des Bryant, Mike Evans, Julio Jones is the big GPP guy for me, because simply Julio Jones last year, he had a lot of games and was very consistent in terms of getting a certain floor of about 7.5 points like Antonio Brown was, but he wasn't as consistent as Brown. Brown had over 13 FanDuel points, I believe, in 15 of 16 games. Now, Julio Jones had below 10 in 5 of those games, but he also had 3 massive games of 29.9 FanDuel points or more. So he is one of the guys that you can see for a high upside play, and those are guys you want in your tournament options because simply you want to score the most possible points you can, and able to get like guys like that for wide receivers, you're going to need touchdowns. Now, the other thing about wide receivers is in GPP, you're going to want to target guys that can go with your quarterback. Benny talked about that as well in terms of handcuffing. Maybe you get a guy like Des Bryant to pair with Tony Romo, or a guy like Vincent Jackson to pair with Jameis Winston if you want to go with a cheaper route. Obviously, guys like Brady and Gronk work for quarterback tight end, but there's a lot of options for wide receiver as well. So be sure to keep this in mind when you're selecting your FanDuel lineups. Of course, a lot of these guys that score a lot of touchdowns will be the higher targets for you in GPP. But if you're looking to go to a cash game, look for guys that catch a lot of balls for a lot of yards and have a really low floor, like guys like Antonio Brown. This has been the previous edition of the NFL Learning Curve on RotoCurve.com. So be sure to check out the rest of our NFL Learning Curve coming soon, and be ready just for football season. It comes up in a few weeks. Good luck, everybody.